Look at this Kent countryside, isn't it amazing? Oh, Bicknor, you've outsold yourself today. I think you look stunningly beautiful. Look at that. Hi everybody. So Paranormal Kent today. If I had a list of sort of say top 10 most beautiful churches in Kent, quite easily say intact wise Bicknor probably has to be in the top 3. Welcome, let's have a look and then I'll tell you about your paranormal story for today. So we're at St James's Church in beautiful Bicknor, which is in map reference terms, we are Hucking Estate isn't too far away. Hollingbourne isn't too far away on the opposite side. So we're sort of stuck in this sort of like no man's land, very similar to if you've seen Paranormal Kent and you've seen the Witchling Church. In fact, the paranormal events actually are very similar here as well. But I thought I'd take you today because not only is it one of these beautiful churches, but the paranormal stories that pertain to it are very similar for the area. And if you could be here right now and you could smell everything. You've got clearly the farm's burning, some or the farmland over yonder. There's some smell of that beautiful log burning smell. Summer's on its way. Oh, it's so beautiful around here, but this does come with a sad story. I'm leading you on to the paranormal story, but there's a sad story to begin with, which is that it's actually the church itself, which unfortunately, let's go in. Well, we can't go in, but what I'll do is I'll take you. So it does say, unfortunately, that this church been robbed and broken into numerous times, unfortunately, so they can't open it in the day now for visitors. That is such a shame. And also there's a lot of graffiti on the walls. It's a 2002 one there. I mean, it's such a shame, you know. People have been leaving their marks here all over. 1956, that says. Huh. Oh, interesting. 1958, if you're to believe it. 1913, if you believe that. I'm always a bit sceptical about graffiti here, and forgive me for being such a sort of pessimist on these types of places where I look at graffiti and go, really? Is it that? Sometimes it is, but I doubt it's so easy to fake. You know, you're never going to know just because somebody's put 13 by it doesn't necessarily mean that's true, does it? But the churchyard is gorgeous, as you can tell. And so I wasn't sure if I told you, so it's a 12th century church. But as with most churches, there's every chance that this could have been predating that as well. So you don't, you know, we have to sort of be a bit, we have to look at it from a historical sort of sense. But it is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there is nowhere around here. I mean, Bicknor village is technically a village all in name, really. I mean, you know, but it really sums up the Kent countryside. And I implore you, absolutely implore you, even though you can't come into the church, to just come down here and explore it, because the journey down, whether you walk, whether you ride your bike, or whether you drive, it really sums up what the Kent countryside is about. And yeah, it's got churches go. What's other really interesting about this church as well that I just wanted to sort of say before I tell you the paranormal, so please hold fire with me, is that there's no electricity. So if you were to go in there, you would note that it was all candlelight. And there are a few churches around that still go like that in Kent. There are a few. However, it's just nice. It sort of brings us back to our sort of past, you know, our historical past. The fact that there was no electricity, there was no heating. You'd freeze. Imagine in the winter time. It'd be freezing cold if you came down here. And these graves here that sort of just seem to be in a small cluster, especially on this side, and then they sort of dotted around, and it's absolutely incredible. Now that sign does say about graffiti and vandalism. I also know that there has been a lot of unwelcome spiritual visitors here, if that makes sense. Being polite on that one. So this church, unfortunately, has seen it all, I think, really, and it just typifies that classic haunted church vibe to it. So let's talk about, because I feel like I just want to sort of talk to you about this today. I want to do something a little bit, you know, very similar to the witching church one. So I've told you the history of the church briefly. I told you what you'd expect if you were going in there, but however, there's two ghost stories that pertain to this church. The first one's they're both very interesting. The first one is what I'd call like a classic paranormal story, that of people being known to visit this place and they hear these haunting footsteps that seem to sort of follow them around the grounds. It's very clearly mentioned as saying that it's outside of the church. So inside the church itself isn't necessarily haunted, but it's the grounds around it that they reckon are probably the most haunted parts of it. So you'd expect to hear haunted footsteps, or someone following you, feeling like that sort of presence of someone being behind you, I think is really what we're trying to sort of say. Second ghost story is a cryptozoology sort of story, really, you could probably class it as, and again it's very similar to witching church. It's amazing how these two churches, even in distance, aren't that far away from each other, and yet their stories both clash. The second story is that of there's been noted to be a creature, it's been labelled as. The creature hasn't been clearly defined in terms of what its description is, so it could be across. Normally, if that's the case, it might sort of necessarily define as more of a folklore story, which we know anyway, really. Let's go into the church bit here. And so the folklore, or the actual ghost, or the cryptozoology, dictates that there is said to be a creature that haunts around this church, almost as a protectorate, but not only that, that it, when approached, it seems to just vanish, completely vanish. So in essence, it sort of stays there, it scares the living bejesus out of you, and then it will just vanish right in front of you when it's approached. But like we said, the creature isn't defined as anything in terms of what description of the creature, so we don't actually know what it's meant to look like, but obviously by labelling it as a creature, we would assume that it is something slightly unnatural to look at. Let's sit on this wonderful wooden bench. So yeah, they're the two stories, but more importantly, what a fantastic place to come to. What a beautiful church, more importantly. I've never had the opportunity to go in, and I really would love to, actually, just to sort of have a look inside, because I've never had the chance to. I've always had the chance to look outside this wonderful thing, and I always forget about it, because it's one of those churches that you'd easily forget about anyway. Yeah, because it's just so out of the way. And yet the irony is that it encapsulates really what the Kent countryside, or a surviving Kent countryside, is still here, you know. But yeah, it's a strange one today. It's a paranormal story, or those two ghost stories, those two paranormal stories, but also links in with the wonderful history of this place. And like I said, unfortunately, I'd heard of some unsavoury acts that had taken place here a long time ago, which is a bit of a shame. And there had been reports of graffiti on the church gravestones and everything else, which is also a shame. But you know, unfortunately these things happen, don't they? So but yeah, that's it. Bicknor Church, Paranormal Bicknor. It's got that Norman style to it, hasn't it? It really has that sort of 12th century vibe, that 1100s vibe that what we'll do is, just because whilst we're here, I would like to show you, so we'll have a little quick wander. Looks like the Virgin Mary there in that stained glass. And the flints that make up this church. It was restored. At a later date. Not fully restored, just restored. Again, very similar to Witchling Church. It had gone through a period of renovation. But truly beautiful, truly haunting in its own way, but really sums up Kent, the ruralness of Kent. And like I said, I implore you, come down here, have a look at this church. Even though you can't enter it, come down, embrace it, understand. For me, if you want to understand what my vision of what Kent countryside is, rural Kent countryside, come down to Bicknor and you might understand it a little bit more. You might understand this rural sort of landscape, and it reminds me of where I used to walk and where I used to grow up as a tiny child, that unfortunately in these days is slowly being lost to the ravages of more building and more housing. But that's a story for another day, isn't it? But there you go, Paranormal Kent, Bicknor Church, St James's Church. Hopefully you enjoyed that. In the immortal words of Phoenix History, thank you as always for watching. Feel free to spread the word of the channel. Feel free to spread the video if you want to. But more importantly, like I always say, you came along with me. We explored it, we checked out the paranormal context of it. And that's really it. So if you do come down to Bicknor and hear haunted footsteps, or if you see a strange creature walking in the grounds of this church, you might have just spotted two of the most famous paranormal acts of Bicknor. There you go. Take care everybody. No more words of Phoenix History, because history matters. It really does, but also the paranormal side of this is truly amazing, isn't it? Thank you. Take care everybody. I'll see you all very soon. Goodbye for now. Kapow.